set up, and then we'll take your questions. Yeah, so we have Chris with the radio mic, and if anybody's got a question, if you could put your hand up. Chris is... there we
go. We hear from day to day different kind of sort of sense about what's going on. One day there's a sense, we're 80% towards an agreement, not that much further to go. The next day the whole thing collapses. We've only got a few weeks to go, as you said, to get a withdrawal agreement. I wonder if you could just, give us a sense of what you might think might happen. What kind of agreement might be reached in a few weeks' time, if there's going to be some kind of agreement?
Yep, we're on. Good question. When they say that sort of 80% is done now, a lot of it is things like geographical indicators. So can a Cornish pasty be made in Paris when the UK is left? Can we make champagne in the UK and send it out? And there's 3,000 different products like that. So those sort of things will just be waved through. That's not a big negotiating piece, I don't think. What they told us in Brussels is they are waiting in the next 4 weeks. They want the actual legal legislative text from the United Kingdom, because it's us that's leaving. It's not on them to finalize all of this and do the work. We're the ones that decided we're leaving the European Union. So it's on us to write the legal text of how we're going to protect citizens' rights, what the settled status scheme is going to look like in the UK, when it's going to come into effect, how long someone's going to have to have lived here, and vice versa in the EU. So that is probably 80% there. A lot of that text is already done, but there's just some questions on the rest of it. The financial settlement started at £100 billion, and then it's negotiated down to about 39 billion. We need to put down a payment plan between now and 4 weeks' time, saying this is how much we're going to pay you in what year, and the exact values, the dates of the transfers, and which pieces of our financial obligations that we've already committed to, that's going to settle. So that phased payment of that 39 billion. And the third thing is the Irish border. And without a solution that's agreeable to both parties, we're not going to get the withdrawal agreement. If they can find a solution, and I really, really do hope that Theresa May accepts the EU proposal, because the impression I got is they're not budging on that. So if she doesn't, then we get no transition period, because that would have bought us an extra year and 3/4 to December 31st, 2020. That's the transition period, or the implementation period that they're talking about. If we have no WA, no withdrawal agreement, we have no transition. That would at least give us a little bit of breathing space, but it would give us breathing space for companies to relocate out of the UK. Look at the banking sector. One of the technical notices from the UK government is we will allow our banking and financial sector passporting rights to any other banking institution anywhere in the EEA, which is the European Economic Area. So you've got the EU 27 plus the Iceland, Switzerland, Norway, and Liechtenstein. So we're going to open up and give passporting rights to everybody inside the EEA. And this is in one of the government proposals for technical notices. If we do that, first thing is, what we're doing is we're allowing UK banks who won't have access to the rest of the EU or anywhere else in the world, because we lose all our agreements. But we're saying to our UK banks, get yourself out of here, because if you relocate to Paris or Dublin or anywhere else, then you can still trade with the UK. Yeah, you still have access to the UK market, and you can also trade with the rest of the single market. And this is a government proposal. We're going to give you a 3-year break in order to be able to do that. What they haven't acknowledged is that if we do that exclusively for the EEA, under WTO terms, we're not allowed to give preferential status to a particular group of countries or a particular country. So we would also have to open up the UK market to some of the more questionable banks in the world, like Alpha Bank in Moscow, or Citibank, or Citibank in New York. Basically, we're just opening up. We was talking about these sharks swimming around the world, waiting for us to swim away. This is exactly what they were talking about in Geneva.
And bringing that right back to home, my business is based in Hilperton. I'm going to have to relocate it to Estonia if I want to continue working. It's that simple.
Good question. Thank you.
I have a question going back to an earlier part of the conversation you're having. Yeah. How exactly did you get Vietnam to have access in the banking and service sector?
I don't know the specific details of that chapter, but I can find out for you if you would like to leave some contact details afterwards. I'll get in contact with the guy who was negotiating that particular chapter.
Okay, I was just a bit curious because the European Union have been quite stringent giving out those trade rights before.
Do you think for the people's vote to actually succeed with the second referendum that we have to go through the, I suppose basically we have to actually go to a no-deal situation first? I mean, perhaps maybe like a Chequers type deal could weaken the argument for a second referendum because the public will believe, well, we've got a deal, we're still partly in out of the EU.
Yeah, Chequers was dead. It didn't even make it out of the building alive. It's what Chequers is basically. It's like taking a country 1/7 the size of the UK, like Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan's got about 1/7 the population. It's like them coming to the UK saying, "We demand you give us a free trade agreement." First of all, it's like, all right, who are you? So we demand that, but what we don't want to do is we don't want to have a trade agreement with the whole of the United Kingdom. We want you to break it up, and we only want to deal with Scotland and England. We don't want to deal with Northern Ireland and Wales. And Chequers basically asks the European Union to break up its fundamental founding underlying pillars of the single market, the freedom of movement of capital, of goods, of services, and of people. Take a big truck. You've got goods in the back. You know, you've got the driver, he's providing a service. Yeah, he's also a person. And you've got customers on one side of the border and the other side of the border. If you take away the freedom of movement of services, you've got no driver. What's the truck going to do? It's going to go from Hogwarts to Middle-earth, you know, all by itself, by magic. I mean, it's ridiculous. To ask the EU to break up those fundamental pillars of the single market, it's never going to happen. Chequers was never going to happen. Yes, I think we do need to wait for Theresa May to come back with no deal. And that's one of the messages that we really pressed home when we were in Brussels and in Geneva, is that the UK government must be told that time's run out. You can't kick the can down the road to November. You can't kick it down the road again until December. So that Theresa May will have to come back to government, and Donald Tusk has said that he will give her extension. They may call an emergency council meeting in November, but that extension past this October summit is only going to be 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks maximum. So basically we've got to have everything done and just a couple of lines to change over the next couple of weeks before it's finalised. So she'll come back to the Commons, she'll have to tell 650 MPs we've got a cliff edge Brexit, the worst possible kind of Brexit it's possible to get, and it's going to happen at 11:01 p.m. next year. MPs will have to decide, is that the best thing for the country? Let's tell them, huh?
Can I just add a little bit to that regarding the Chequers deal? It's possibly appropriate to read something or a little bit of something I posted on Facebook a couple of weeks back, which explains really what is the EU's issue with the Chequers deal, because obviously Theresa May still thinks that, you know, the EU should be willing to accept it. As we've been saying, the whole raison d'etre of the EU is peace, not trade. It's peace. Everything that the EU does, not always successfully, I would say, is aimed at achieving one very simple objective, basically to ensure that none of its members has any reason to think that there's anything to be gained by kicking hell out of one of its neighbours. So basically, the EU tries to put in place policies that put all of its members on a kind of level playing field. Now, we all know that it's not necessarily been all that successful in every respect of that, as the recent issues with migration have demonstrated, but the basic concept is praiseworthy. And, you know, it's as fine an example as you'll find anywhere in the world of prioritising community over trade. Now, into that comes Theresa May with her Chequers deal. The UK doesn't like some aspects of that very carefully constructed policy framework of the EU. We're not particularly interested in community, it seems to me, apart from what we can get out of it. And we prioritise trade. And because two of the fundamental instruments of the EU, namely the customs union and the single market, are to do with trade, the UK and in fact Theresa May's Chequers Agreement set about trying to drive a wedge between those two particular aspects of the policy framework and all the others that we don't like so much. Now, and the EU, not unreasonably, having invested several decades and God knows how many billions of euros in developing all of that, doesn't particularly like this idea, and it's unwilling to let the UK do that. And the issue is this: the fundamental assumption of Brexit is that the EU values trade enough to allow the UK to drive that wedge home. Well, it doesn't. The EU sees trade as a means, not as an end. It values community, peace and stability above all else. And that is why the EU will never allow the UK to separate any of the freedoms.
You say that Donald Tusk reckons the extension will be about 2 weeks and that we shouldn't go for a people's vote until we're at the backstop of a no-deal situation. Can you clarify how long it takes to enact another referendum in terms of passing the bill through Parliament that is needed and the campaign period that is needed and the rule setting that is needed, so that we've got an idea about how long there genuinely is before we could have a people's vote? Thanks.
Brilliant point. There is time. That's the important message to get out. There's various reports coming out from Brexit-leaning people saying that there is no time. It'll take 6 months. It'll take 9 months. Or it took 2 years to get the question right before. They're trying to pull a rug out from under us. The Electoral Commission rules are you've got to have a 10-week campaign. Getting the bill and turned into an act and through the House of Commons up to the Lords, back down again for ratification in the House of Commons, you can turn it into a law within 3 weeks. So you're talking 13 weeks overall is the shortest possible time. Right now we've got 6 months because we can withdraw. Lord John Kerr, one of the authors of Article 50, he reckons it's just as simple as Theresa May going across the channel saying, "Can I have my letter back, please?" And that's Article 50 revoked. There's a number of legal questions and opinions as to whether it's possible to unilaterally withdraw Article 50. Most of them, probably 98%, say, yes, you can just withdraw it unilaterally because you decided to leave by yourselves. You can decide to stay in by yourselves, as long as it happens before 11:01 p.m. on the 29th of March next year. So there is time, and we have to start the lobbying now. Don't wait till she comes back with no deal. Start lobbying your MPs tomorrow. Write them a letter. We demand a people's vote on the final deal. Just do that. And tell them again. Just 1 or 2 lines, fill their inboxes, and make sure they know that the people want a choice on this.
This is a question perhaps for everybody here as well as the panel. I have written to Andrew Morrison, and he sent me back a pretty generic letter, I don't think was written by him. And I've been able to formulate a counter-argument to reply to everything except for he quoted the figures 400 and something against 122, agreeing to apply Article 50. I'd like some views on how I can counteract that argument.
Ask them how many of them read it before they voted for it.
Good one.
I was in Edinburgh a few weeks back, and I had the Scottish Minister for Europe, and there were members of the Scottish Parliament from Labour, Conservatives, Lib Dems and Greens, and it was a Q&A session. I was on that side, and I said, can we start with a show of hands? How many of you have read Article 50? And 2 of them put their hands up. I said, it's only 5 paragraphs. It's not that hard to find. And then another question I asked is, how many of you have read the EU preparedness notices? And these are really, really interesting, because we get these technical notices, a load of rubbish written by a teenager at the Department of Exiting the EU under Dominic Raab. But the ones you need to be reading are the EU preparedness notices. They're on the European Commission the website. They've been releasing them for over a year now, preparing the EU 27 for Brexit. They are ready. You know, they know they're going to take a bit of a hit. Rotterdam particularly will, because we have a lot of ships going backwards and forwards from the UK to the deep water port in Rotterdam, where our goods are put onto bigger ships and then shipped off to China, to Canada, South America and places. They know what's going to happen in Rotterdam. They've been having trial days and test days. There's a big one coming up in November where they're literally going to have Brexit's happened yesterday. What's going to happen with the port? But they're ready, they're prepared, and they've got the financial support and the community support to support the damage that's going to be done to specific areas within the European Union. Have a look at them. They make interesting reading.
Yeah, hi. I actually run a company that imports aluminium and steel from the Czech Republic, so kind of on the other side of the fence. But obviously it's going to have some kind of effect on me. We have lorries coming over all the time. Just wondered what the kind of situation would be if it does continue as it is. Just some kind of guidance towards it that without spin would be lovely.
Czech Republic, is that Vitkovice steel you get from there, Czech Republic?
Yeah.
We bought that.
I did. I did hear you say
I was living and working over
industry.
there.
Comax. It's yeah.
That's right. Importing will be less of a problem in terms of depending on what our government do. At the moment, they've filed a schedule of tariffs with the World Trade Organization for goods, but not for services or agriculture. So basically, they've copied and pasted the EU's current tariff regime. So whatever price you're paying at the moment for your steel, theoretically, it should be the same, apart from the fact the pound would have fallen off a cliff. And if it falls by 20%, your cost of production, your cost of purchase increases by
20% since Brexit. So hasn't recovered either. So.
Yeah, well, if you thought that was bad, wait till 11:01 next year. Seriously, it's the world is waiting to just take us apart.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hi. I just want to ask you about a real-world business example, and it works the other way around. I got an interesting phone call on Monday where I was asked to supply 25 dancers and drummers to an event in Belgium. They then told me that the event was for 92 days, and it starts on the 10th of June and finishes on the 22nd of September 2019. My problem is, am I going to be able to get the drummers there? Am I going to be able to get a work permit? I looked at Schengen, and Schengen lasts up for 90 days, so the fact we're going over the 90 days is another problem. The other thing that you mentioned was tariffs on trade and services. So in effect, we're supplying services. So would there be tariffs on the services that I'm supplying? And if so, who would be responsible for picking up those tariffs? Me as the contractor or the company in Belgium that's employing us?
Some good questions there. I'll come on to actually I might pass the tariff one across to Stuart for the services. But that sort of question we get every day. But you're talking about a project next year. There's a company that manufactures surgical instruments in the UK for the NHS. The only place they can get the raw materials to make those surgical instruments is from the European Union. They can't get it anywhere else in the world because that's the only place they make it. And they need to place their purchase orders to order that raw material 7 months in advance because that's how long it takes the European Union business to get the raw material ready to be shipped and brought to the UK. Today, if they want to place an order, their supplier in the EU is saying, I can't take your order. I don't know what price to charge you. I can only insure it as far as Calais, goods in transit when I'm delivering it to you. I can't insure it on the ferry or once it gets to the UK because I don't know what's going to go on with that. I don't know what duties you're going to be paying on the kit. So I cannot sell you these raw materials. These raw materials are processed for 3 months in the UK. Then that's a semi-finished product. It's passed to another UK business that then does some more processing for another 6 weeks before that final product gets delivered to the NHS. So today, in September, this guy is saying, I won't be able to sell these surgical instruments to the NHS this time next year, about a year away, because he cannot get the raw materials. I totally understand your issue, and I would actively encourage you to write to your Member of Parliament and Department of International Trade and ministers and say, look, this is my problem. What's going to happen to my business? Can I do this or can I not? If we leave with no withdrawal agreement, I would suggest not. If we get the withdrawal agreement and we have the implementation period, then you've got that window of opportunity where very little changes. In terms of pricing, I'll pass that across to Stuart.
On the services side of things, I mean, my business is basically providing consulting services, and the majority, if not all of my clients, are based in the European Union. For me, the issue has been, for example, just a couple of weeks back, a company in Belgium wanted to put my name into a tender for a 3-year contract that will start in principle in February next year, which would require me to be based in Brussels effectively for 3 years, or the greater part of it. At the time they asked me to participate in the tender, it hadn't occurred to them that my status would change within 1 month of the start of the contract. So I said to them, are you aware that there will be residency issues to consider, work permit issues to consider, visas to consider, the possibility that I may actually need to live over there in order to avoid any logistical problems of travelling around, because most of the work would actually be in the Western Balkans. And no, that hadn't occurred to them, and you could sense immediately a certain frigidity in the relationship. But I then said to them, would it make any difference if I were to say that I am relocating my company to Tallinn, Estonia? That's okay then, they said. So what I have done in order to be able to continue providing services into the European Union is I have got myself digital residency in Estonia, and I will be setting up a digital service company based in Tallinn, which will enable me to continue to provide services into the European Union. And I would strongly recommend that any company whose business depends critically upon the provision of services to the European Union to avail themselves of that opportunity.
I'm missing something. If you've set up a digital services company in Tallinn, and that digital service company is then going to provide your services as an Englishman in the EU, will they not be breaking the law because you will be effectively working for an Estonian company, and the Estonian company would require you to have a work permit, surely?
No, one of the lovely things about this setup is you don't actually have to be there. I can be a director of the company with a Estonian digital identity, a director of an Estonian registered company, which to all intents and purposes trades as an entirely Estonian entity. And the fact that I happen to hold a British passport is apparently irrelevant.
I understand that completely, but are you saying then at no point will you set foot in the EU?
Well, I will have to set foot in the EU in order to conduct my business.
At which point are you not breaking the law?
At which point I will possibly have broken the law, yes.
Okay, just was checking.
Yes. I take a somewhat insurgent type view to this kind of thing. I've been in situations before where I've been kidnapped and held to ransom and had to flee a country at gunpoint through the night. So little things like being in a country illegally doesn't really bother me.
That's pretty good, but when I've got 25 dancers and drummers, it's not that easy.
Don't know. Oh yeah, it is on. Well, if you're a new resident of Estonia, welcome. Some of us have been residents for quite a long time now, and you can work there. It's fine. I have my card here. My question, well, it's not a question. It's just an observation. I don't know if any other VAT-registered EU traders are here, But we received letters 2 weeks ago telling us to start our planning for no deal. They came through, they're basically detailing it. And what most people forget, well, a lot of people will forget, is as a business-to-business trader, is dying. You don't pay VAT when you import from Europe. Well, all small businesses have to start paying VAT. So on a cash flow basis, there's a 20% increase.
Batteries are coming.
Yeah, there's no light on it at all. I'll try and talk about, so for a small business, you've got a 20% increase, now the cash flow is VAT, which the VAT man was paid up front. You've also then, obviously, you've got your VAT where you're charging, you're selling to business in Europe. They're not going to pay that as well because they go to another business. And what is key is that what is we've got all that paperwork to do to try and sell to them. And what is key, and I've spoken to my suppliers, and a fair proportion are saying, well, that's too much hassle to carry on trading with you. Yeah. We don't actually want to trade with you because I can trade with the same business in Belgium who does the same as me in Belgium, same person does it in France. I can trade with them. I don't have to do the paperwork. Whereas you, I've got paperwork now, and forget it. And that came out. That's 2 weeks. It's already happening. I know from other things, the ports are already planning. I have inroads into ports. They're planning for no deal. Education sector's well ahead of planning for no deal. I think, and to be honest, my insurance company has moved overseas for my business insurance. My personal insurance is already moved, and my medical insurance is moved. Yeah. To be honest, it's gone beyond the time of redemption for business. It is actually now too late. Yeah, people can go on holiday and bring their cigarettes back, but for business, it's now too late. There's not enough time.
Just to expand, yeah, we agree. But to expand on that just a little bit, of the 5.4 million SMEs in the UK, 334,000 of them, if you believe the leave percentage, that's just 6% of them, only deal exporting to the European Union. Each of those 334,000 companies employing between 10 and 50 people, they will have to appoint in every single EU country a VAT liable person. So if you're talking about somebody, you have to have somebody in France, somebody in Spain who is responsible for paying the EU VAT on the products that you're selling him out of the United Kingdom. You don't have to do that today, but there's a cost to that. The VAT has to be paid up front, so hitting the cash flow exactly as you said. On the VAT thing also, you have, what was I going to say about that? I was on a roll then for a second. So you got a nominated person to be responsible for paying the VAT. It's got to be paid up front. And the third thing is the digital VAT refunds, because you can balance it off with the VAT that you've paid and collected. You lose access to the European Union digital VAT refund system, and you're back to filling in a piece of paper, putting it in the post, hoping it arrives at the right office before you can get your VAT back. The whole VAT thing is just an absolute nightmare outside the EU for small businesses. You think 334,000, even if it was just those people that were affected, how many households' income rely on that income from those businesses? And I started off by saying I'm not speaking as a Remainer, as a patriot. You know, when we lose jobs in this country, Her Majesty's Treasury lose corporation taxes. They lose PAYE. They lose income tax. They lose national insurance money. When they lose that kind of money, you think austerity was bad before. If they're losing tens upon tens, if not hundreds of billions of pounds, where does the money come from for the NHS? Where's that Brexit dividend?
Hi. If we get the people's vote, which I very much hope we do, when we get the people's vote, yes. My question is, what our strategy is going to be to win it. I'm very much thinking about the emotional side that you were talking about, particularly Stuart at the end here, versus the facts. We've seen the facts are horrifying. But as one of the people, like Claire and a lot of the other Bar for Europe people who are out on the streets and on the street stalls, we're still seeing a lot of entrenched, angry views, particularly from hardline Brexiters. I mean, I had somebody rip up a leaflet this morning. I have a family member who works for Jaguar Land Rover who still believes that Brexit is a great thing, even though, you know, his boss has lost his job and his boss's boss has lost his job. How can we convince these people without being accused of project fear again? I mean, it's project reality, and what I'm hearing from people in the audience who have businesses, that it's reality, but they will still accuse us of being project fear and still have that patriotic verb of wanting to go back to the 70s and all the other stuff that we hear on the streets. So.
Yeah, Project Fear, as you say, is now Project Fact. You know, that's a fact. Since the referendum, the first thing we saw was the pound fall off a cliff. It's lost nearly 18% of its value, the British pound. It performed worse than the Guatemalan quetzal in 2016-17. The British pound was one of the worst performing currencies on the entire planet. We told them that the currency would lose value, and they called it Project Fear. You know, we said foreign direct investment would swing away from the United Kingdom. There's foreign companies investing in the UK, creating jobs. Since the referendum, £300 billion has swung away of foreign direct investment into the UK. That equates to around about £30 billion loss of tax income to HM Treasury. So there's a £30 billion hole. Yeah, we used to be the fastest growing economy in the group of 7 largest, richest economies on the planet. 2 years later, our growth is halved, and we're one of the worst performing economies on the entire continent. You know, they talk about Project Fear. Yeah, you call it Project Fear, but what they were is warnings about exactly what's going to happen. And guess what? Over the last 18 months, 2 years, it has happened. You know, now, if you weren't ready for Project Fear, you better be ready for Project Catastrophe, because that's what's coming.
But they still dismiss that. They still won't listen to you. It's almost like a religion or something.
It is. You don't need all of them, don't forget. So there was 685,000 people. That was the difference between Remain and Leave. 685,000 people. If it swung the other way, we wouldn't be having this discussion tonight. There's probably 20% of the electorate that are real hardcore Brexiteers. You're never going to get them. You know, what you need is the 10 or 15% that is kind of soft. You know, they thought it was Project Fear and they ran away. But now you're going to get some softer Remainers who thought, yeah, I think Brexit will be bad. I'll just tick the box. They're now seeing the EU as bullying us. You know, and we hear that a lot. The EU are bullying Theresa May. How dare they talk to her like that? And you think, well, hang on. Well, it's a rules-based organisation. You know, we helped write the darn rules that they are now following. How can we complain that they're following the rules that we helped them write in the first place? They're not bullying us. They're just following the rules and the legal texts that even Lord John Kerr wrote.
The other thing is, one of my best friends recently said exactly that. You know, I'm after the way they treated Theresa May, I'm definitely pro-Leave now. I said, draw a breath, take a step back. The facts have not changed. The constraints have not changed. The processes have not changed. Don't change.
I think with the way there's been this outburst of anger with regards to how Theresa May was treated, I think a lot of that was actually orchestrated by British politicians anyway, and the press. They created a situation where it was inevitable to happen, and then they hyped it all up, got angry about it. But I think you need to make a positive case for the European Union. The notion that the European Union is undemocratic, for example, people need to understand the way the European Union works, because in this country we've been sadly lacking education. You know, children aren't taught about the European Union, and I think that positive case, and as Stuart was saying about the foundations of the European Union, you know, it was built by the people that witnessed the mud of Passchendaele and the beaches of Normandy. They built it for a reason, and I think if we can kind of get through to people and make people realise that it comes from noble origins, then we might get a chance.
If you want to see an example of how it's possible to be really enthusiastic with zero negative content about the EU, go and look at a website mycitizenship.eu. I set it up. It's rather good.
So I'm going to help out here, Jason. I'll actually help finishing that one off for you, because Sally was just asking about what we can actually say to leavers. So something actually came out in the news today, which very few people have picked up on yet. The UK Civil Aviation Authority is basically going to have to take all of the responsibility back for aviation safety and regulation from EASA from March the 30th next year, which you would think wouldn't be a huge problem, except that we've basically taken all of the responsibility we've had over the last sort of 20, 30 years, and EASA have done everything. They've got all of the responsibility, they've got all the technical expertise, they've got the engineers. So basically, we've just been acting as like a portal through to EASA. So the CAA director last year started sort of making noises like he was very concerned about the direction things were going. But today they've actually issued the official directive of the CAA to airline operators, aviation engineers, air traffic controllers, etc. That advice is you need to figure out what you need to do yourselves, because we don't know, which is not really good. So if anyone actually says to you, Project Fear, etc., you can actually point them to the UK CAA's own website, and it's actually covered in the UK government's released papers that have come out today as well. And they've only issued like 3 or 4 paragraphs, that's it. There's nothing else in there. The crucial thing here as well is we wrote the rule book on UK aviation safety. Douglas Bader, the famous Spitfire pilot, actually wrote most of the legislation that all of our aviation safety guidelines are all built on. And to build the expertise back up again is going to take 20 or 30 years, which is a pretty big problem. And just on that other point, just to expand, the government have actually started using the information that 3 blokes in a pub are actually been producing as their official statements on policy. How many was there, Jason?
When we were in Geneva, we were looking at that bunch that were released at that time, going through them. I saw at least 4 of them that had entire paragraphs.
Verbatim
from 3 blokes in a pub. Unbelievable. But just to touch on that EASA, for people that are not familiar, the EASA is the European Aviation Safety Agency, and they're the people that certify mechanics, engineers, anybody who works in an airport, working on an aeroplane, whether they're putting duct tape around the wing to make sure it doesn't fall off, or whether they're refueling it. You know, you have to have a certain level of certification to be able to do these jobs. And previously, all of those certificates and those job badges that you can do this, you can't do that, were all done by this organization called EASA, E-A-S-A. Now, EASA refused to acknowledge, post-Brexit, clearly, because it's a European Union type organization. This is one of those 750 plus treaties that Article 50 talks about in paragraph 3. All your treaties cease to apply. EASA is one of them. So not only will our aircraft mechanics not be certified to work on planes, but the UK agency that used to issue those certificates is also unable to issue EASA qualified certificates anymore. EASA is one thing. Then you've got the Open Skies Agreement, which is an agreement between the European Union and many other countries around the world, including the USA, which allow flights to come in and out of the European Union. You've got the Single Skies Agreement, which is the air traffic control systems that the UK works with our other European neighbours. We lose all of these different things. And what that means is, with no withdrawal agreement, 11:01 p.m., our username and our password are cancelled. So our air traffic control will not be able to talk to our neighbouring countries' air traffic control systems. Ireland have already put in new shipping routes. They're in template form at the moment, looking to be finalised next year. So the Republic of Ireland, goods can go directly from Spain and France and Holland around the UK, outside our waters, in a direct route instead of coming through the UK. There's so many, 750 of these different treaties. Truck drivers, you get one driving license to drive a car, one for driving a motorbike, one for driving a truck. If you've got a truck driving license, you might want to be able to take lettuce in the back, which is not very dangerous, I'm told, unless it's wet. But if you've got hazardous goods in the back, sorry, I haven't even had a beer yet. But if you've got hazardous goods, you get your truck driving license certified by an agency that's accredited and attested by the European Union. Now, all of the people that issue UK truck drivers with their driving licenses to carry goods within the European Union, all of their licenses are invalid. All of their insurance policies are invalid without a withdrawal agreement. And we don't have any agencies in the UK that can recertify these people to operate inside the European Union. I could sit here for days going through each of these different treaties that all cease and terminate as a result of our members of Parliament, whatever percentage was, 400 and something MPs voted to invoke Article 50. If they didn't read it and they didn't understand what they were doing, then the whole vote should be stopped and we should start again.
Yeah, you've painted a picture of a future which is somewhere between bleak and catastrophic. You seem to be taking it all in good heart, actually, laughing. And do you think it's possible that the government is well aware of the catastrophe that faces us and is playing a political game, and they're going to save us at the end?
I did my crying on June the 24th, 2016. I cried my eyes out. I watched every single result come in. You watch the first one come in, it's Gibraltar, 96% remain. You go, get in, I knew this was going to happen. And then Sunderland, of all people, Sunderland, 76% voted to leave. And I'm thinking, you clearly didn't understand the question. It wasn't hard. But you're absolutely right. They are playing political games. Theresa May is trying to hang on to number 10. The only way she can hang on to number 10 is by fronting off against the European Union and saying, no, we're not going to accept your proposal for the border in the Irish Sea, because she needs the DUP's support. And if she loses the DUP's support by having that border, because they will never accept that, then the government falls. Jeremy Corbyn and Labour Party are driving me absolutely crazy, because last 3 days they've had their conference, 4 days. I was up in Liverpool on Sunday, and you've got Barry Gardner, the Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade, you've got Keir Starmer, you've got John McDonnell, you've got Diane Abbott, you've got Jeremy Corbyn himself. They will tell you 5 different things in 5 different speeches, and then people, Labour voters, Labour supporters, you can pick the one that you want, and that's what Labour stands for. One of them will say, absolutely, we can have a people's vote, but we can't have a Remain option on it. It should be to accept the deal we're given or not. Well, what happens if not? If we've got no deal, what then? No deal is no deal. You've got to have a second option. But they are playing political games with all of our lives, and that thing infuriates me. The second time I cried over Brexit was after the first day, that Thursday, when we went back to the hotel, having had the first day of meetings with these people, and I realized that I knew it was going to be bad. I had no idea how catastrophic it was going to be, and I cried my eyes out again.
And I'm talking about taking it all in good heart. Somebody asked me recently how I felt about Brexit. 2 words: incandescently angry.
Can I ask, just so I get that clear in my head, everything stops. Now, does the renegotiation of the basic treaties like shipping, trains, aeroplanes, does all that depend on an EU deal? Are we looking at 10 years of being marooned on an island, or how does this work?
They'll renegotiate them one at a time, but there's 750 of them. How they'll prioritize them and decide, okay, well, we're on this island, what's most important? Is it important that the aeroplanes fly, because a lot of our food comes in on planes to Heathrow as a hub? Is it important to make sure the shipping's done first? Or is it important to do the banking bit first? Because if I'm in Paris on March 30th next year, and I've put my UK issued debit card into a cash point, draw out €500 or €100 or whatever, if there's no mechanism for Credit Lyonnais or Banque Paribas, whoever the French bank is, if there's no mechanism for them to get that €500 back from Lloyds or NatWest or whoever I bank with here, and there won't be, why are they going to give me €500?
Will that actually affect all financial transactions for every single company?
Visa, I'm told, if you've got a direct account with Visa, not through your bank, and not on your debit card, but direct with Visa, they're a global organization, and MasterCard as well. I mean, I think Santander, if you've got debit cards with a little Visa logo on them, they will all be cancelled before 29th of March next year, and you're getting reissued with a MasterCard for some reason or another. We did a little game on Twitter, because nobody believed me about the bank's debit cards not working. And I said, well, don't believe me then, ask your bank. And we did. #AskYourBank. And people did. And guess how many banks came back and said, no, we guarantee your debit card will work in cash points in the European Union after 29th of March next year if you have no withdrawal agreement. How many do you think? Not a single one. We're pretty sure it'll be okay. Yes, it should work. We'll come back to you when we know more information. And we're like 6 months away from this happening. They're not ready. The UK have done, this is what they told us in Brussels, the UK has done about 5% of the preparation it needs to do for the no-deal Brexit. They've done about 95.
But that's for cash cards, that's not for normal bank transfers.
Yeah. How internet banking is going to work is anybody's guess.
I would suggest get yourself an account with TransferWise.
I actually have a tweet here from NatWest, because I did your thing. It said, "Hi Chris, our aim is to continue to provide you with the same level of service as we do today. Like you, we don't know yet the full implications and the outcomes of Brexit." So, there you go.
Are we ready? Do we want a people's vote?
Yes!
Cancel Brexit, that's a good one.
Talking about having no deal exit, but the withdrawal agreement, section 10(2)(b) that I'm looking at right now, because you can download it, says that nothing will be created, no border arrangements between Northern Ireland or the Republic will exist after exit day, which feature physical infrastructure, border posts, checks and controls, which a no deal would require. So isn't this going to mean that the government will be breaking its own Act of Parliament, the Withdrawal Act?
Correct. That's exactly what it means. The EU Withdrawal Act was passed in July by Parliament and received royal assent at the end of July. So it's now an act of law in the United Kingdom. So the UK government has made it illegal to put in any checks, controls or measures on the border between the Northern Ireland and the Republic. However, under WTO rules, if you measure, we didn't talk much about sort of country-specific quotas and tariff rate quotas earlier on, but we just talked about tariffs. But you also have to be able to, as a country trading under WTO rules, you have to be able to measure the volume and the value of goods that are coming into your country and leaving your country, so that the other third country can apply the right tariff. If they've got, maybe it's Argentinian beef, they've got 200 tons they're allowed to ship to the UK every year. If we're not measuring it, and we've got no checks and controls on the Irish border, what's coming into Northern Ireland, how on earth is anybody going to try and trade with us or even negotiate a free trade deal? Have you ever negotiated a free trade deal with a country that's got wide open borders? It's just not feasible, viable. So Chequers is dead. Theresa May's political career, I think, is dead, along with a lot of other current government ministers. I don't know what's going to happen unless we stop Brexit.
I'm having a really big problem trying to get my head around the concept that everything will just stop. I mean, given the amount of food that comes in and out of the country every day and the stocks that are held here, I think it's just unfeasible. So I know that none of you are likely to have an inside track or anyone with an ear to the government. So what does your gut tell you will actually happen if there is a no deal? Because it's not just going to stop. There'll be riots within a week.
Well, the way I think about it in my own head, because I have exactly that same question. I can't get my head round the notion that things will stop. I explain it to myself in these terms: if the DVLA takes away my driving license, then technically I can still drive, and I could get quite a long way down the motorway before somebody actually pulls me over. But the bottom line is that if DVLA takes away my driving license, all the systems still work, but I'm going to get myself into a heck of a lot of trouble as a result. And that's the sense in which things will stop. Things will still be capable of working. All the infrastructure will be there, but all of the enabling legislation that makes it legitimate for it to happen will be withdrawn, and therefore, basically, I mean, to take the example of trade, we'll be back to being a nation of smugglers.
And just to follow on from that, without the legislation, the UK, we just worry about ourselves. The European Union, because we lose access to the 27 other member states of the European Union, but the EU also have free trade agreements, cooperation agreements, other things with another 60 countries around the world. We lose all of those free trade agreements as well. And there's talk about if we've got goods in transit, they will be covered. So if they leave the UK before 11:01 p.m., they'll still be accepted in ports in the United States and Canada and South Korea and Brazil and wherever. But anything that's shipped afterwards, under those old trade agreements, those trade agreements have stopped. So when we ship goods out, they'll be turned away from the port at the other end because they won't have the correct paperwork. Or they'll sit offshore for months at a time until all the paperwork's put in place.
So you are saying that no food will come in and out on the 29th? That's it?
That's what we've been told. We cannot let it happen. It's absolutely impossible to make a success of Brexit. And people say, yeah, we survived the Second World War, we'll be all right. And I'm like, wait, what? That's not what I want from Brexit. That's not what people were promised. You know, we don't just want to survive. You know, we want to thrive and be successful like we used to when we were in the EU.
I think I'm right in saying that the police are actually putting contingency in place for civil unrest. They're actually planning for that now.
To follow on from that, the Home Office have instructed police forces across the country to cancel all annual leave for March and April next year for a period of 2 months. That's the similar sort of proposals that they've put out for the M20, where they're shutting down the M20, shutting down the M26, I think it is, and the M20 is having 2 lanes shut down on one side to be preparing for a lorry park because they won't be able to get in and out. But the police is another really interesting one. UK police forces use 32 different EU data agencies and databases every single day, whether it's the European arrest warrant, whether it's the Schengen information system, whether it's the criminal information database records of people within the European Union. 32 of these different databases that UK police forces use every day, access stopped, logins are cancelled. That's what everything stops means. It crosses every part of our lives.
The microphone's not working.
I have one big problem with people's vote, and it's the same problem I had with Cameron's referendum. And then what? Say there is a people's vote with Remain and Leave. If Leave wins, we're still in the same old mess we're in now. If Remain wins, who's going to carry it out? Theresa May can't, she'll have no credibility. If the Tories pick another leader, it will be a more pro-Brexit leader, because they're a pro-Brexit party with their members. And as you said, Jason, Corbyn doesn't want to remain. So, a people's vote, and then what? People's vote can't be the end. It can't be what we aim for. It's and then what? We need a new relationship with Europe. Not a people's vote, and it's the end. It's the new relationship. Personally, I think it's going to be a general election, and the parties will have to set out their policies on where we will be dealing with Europe and to stay in or a new relationship. But it can't just be a people's vote. It's a people's vote, and then what?
A people's vote, and then what? Well said. General election, bear in mind we've got 4 weeks left, so it doesn't really matter who's in government. When we run out of time, we run out of time. Yep. The only way to stop Brexit is by...
Today was very important stuff. I was embarrassed because obviously the vote for Remain. Okay? A lot of my business is in Europe. I felt embarrassed to
because I still need to talk to these people. But what that guy said to me was basically, I wanted to say, I'm uncomfortable with the people's vote, but if we get it, then I'll go along with it. But what needs to be on that paper, and who poses the questions? Is it going to be no deal? Take the deal? Remain in, which would be good. But what about the fourth one? It's got to be remain in, and you've got to engage with the leave people. It's got to be stay and change. Campaign with it to change. And if that's not done, then it's what that guy said. It's a shitstorm, whichever way you look at it.
Can I tackle the stay and change aspect of this? Because I think you're right. I mean, I've been working with various EU institutions now for getting on 30 years, and for a start, I think in order to know where one goes in the future, one needs to make a differentiation between the European Union as the geopolitical entity and the European Commission, which is effectively its implementing agency. Most of the problems originate not with the European Union as a concept, but with the way in which the European Commission operates in implementing the concept. And I think as long as we can retain a clear distinction between the policy ideas, the foundation, which I think is good, and the way in which it is implemented, on the other hand, then I think we can begin to work for a way forward. One of the problems I always face, bearing in mind my work is policy implementation and very little else, is trying to communicate to people, and not just here, but I'm talking about top level government officials and so forth. It's very difficult to get people to dissect a system in sufficient detail to be able to work out a realistic solution to a situation like this. But I think that's what we've got to be prepared to do.
I think two answers on the ballot paper. One is we remain in the EU, and the other is accept the deal that we've got. And whatever deal she comes back with at the end of October, that's one option. The other option is to stay in the EU. Yeah, that's it. Stay in. I mean, I'd rather have stay in the EU or remain in the EU as the options, but I don't think we'll get away with that.
Leave have got to be engaged with. There's some Leave's worries.
Yeah, leave with the deal. Yeah.
But we've got to engage with Leave and take it with us. That's right.
There's a lot of campaign groups from People's Vote, from Best in Britain, from Open Britain. There's a lot of different campaigns groups, and they all target different segments and demographics of the country. There's OFOC, which is getting the young people, sort of under 25s, targeting those. They all appeal to different audiences. I mean, there's a lot of people I don't appeal to. My daughter likes me, but hey. But you need lots of different campaign groups working together for the same ultimate outcome. So it's a case of let's let them get to work. When we know what the deal is, start writing now, demand your people's vote. That's the first thing, get the vote. Second, we can argue about what the question is later, after we know what the deal is or not. And I don't think there's going to be a withdrawal agreement on the 18th of October. It's at that point we then have to really start shouting, and shouting loud. Yeah. Bear in mind we've got 2 million new younger voters who are now on the electoral register since the last referendum. There's fewer elderly people, and the proportion of people who voted Remain versus Leave at that point were very, very different in those two demographics. So there was something like 75% of young people voted to Remain and 75% of older people voted to Leave. So the not everybody. I do take that absolutely. But the demographics have changed. Also, now we have more facts and information on the table, and we don't need all the voters. There'll be the 20% that we're never going to get, and they'll just cry and cry and cry for the next 40 years, like Nigel Farage, and that's fine. They can cry, but we will get my best estimate is 60% remain. If we can get 60-40, that is a definitive answer. If it's 52-48, who knows? If Leave win again, so be it. You know, you now know what you're voting for. If you still want it, you can have it. And I shall bid you all farewell, adieu.
I think personally, my opinion is that we probably have to accept that Brexit's going to be an issue now for at least a generation, regardless of what happens. So if we manage to turn the result around, there's going to be a big backlash against it anyway. You just need to accept that that is going to be the way the political landscape's going to be. And I think, so talking about engaging with Leave voters, you've got people like Bath for Europe that are doing that weekly, where they're actually reaching out and they're talking to people. And then, you know, social media is a nightmare because people are basically screaming at each other. But with the work that they do, they actually meet people face to face, talk to them on a human level, and it actually works. So I guess that's really the way that you can change hearts and minds, is actually meeting people.
Yeah, can I add to that just a little bit? I think that politicians and governments are going to have to focus on what were the real causes of the Leave vote and what the real issues behind the things that they're so unsatisfied about are, and come out with policies that address those, so that they're not feeling that they've now been voted against and are being ignored. And I think it's very important for politicians to really dig in and understand the root causes of all the negativity.
Can I just ask, please, has anybody done the math on, I mean, hearing about the 750 treaties and so on, and a replacement for the European Aviation Association and all that, what it would actually cost the UK? I mean, I've always thought the Brexit bonus and the 350 million was utter nonsense, but this is money, this is additional cost in setting up all these replacement systems. Has anybody costed that up? Do you know?
To set up the admin, we're pretty good at admin in the UK. You know, our civil service has got 405,000 staff working for the civil service in the UK. You know, the EU Commission's got 33,000, covering 28 countries and 550 million people.
Stop 3,000 person years.
3,000 person years.
At salary equivalent, so what would we say? Just on salary payroll.
Do you know, they were laughing at, when we were in Geneva, they were laughing at the amount of money we're paying our international trade negotiators. They said they're getting paid £40,000 a year. It's like, international trade negotiators working for countries expect quite significantly more than that. Yeah. And that's what Liam Fox's department is paying. So if we pay them peanuts, we're going to get not a lot of fun. But the real cost isn't so much the few hundred million that it might cost to run a new department to do something. The big cost is the foreign direct investment that we're losing. You know, it's over 1.1 trillion pounds has been invested in the UK, 400 billion in the last 5 or 6 years from the European Union, 300 billion from the United States, another 300 billion from Japan and other countries around the world into places like Honda, Jaguar Land Rover, Nissan, Sunderland, across the United Kingdom, creating jobs, creating prosperity, rebuilding communities. And that foreign direct investment's going away, and that's the big cost.
Payroll, 2 billion.
Something I know you're lead on about sovereignty, that this would kind of be putting a price to sovereignty of all these duplicate systems we'd have to set up and pay for out of UK income. I just thought it might help change somebody's mind somewhere.
Yeah, the sovereignty one's good. I usually refer people to the government white paper, or the even government's website itself, which begins saying, the United Kingdom's always retained its sovereignty. Hello? Did you get that bit? So £3 billion in 2 years, I'm told by my friendly expert on the right. And I like experts.
Civil service payroll.
That's civil service payroll only. Bear in mind, Liam Fox has been around the world twice in the last couple of years, so you can add a bit onto that for flights. I'm not joking, he really has.
Let's look on the bright side and say, okay, we've won the people's vote to remain. We're staying in. referring back to the other gentleman's question there about what happens then, what sort of damage do you think, or what sort of relationship could we then have with the EU, and what would be the impact on our economy, our society, after that sort of event?
It'll take a long time just to recover what we've already lost. The terms, if we just withdraw Article 50, our terms of remaining in the EU stay the same as they were before, until next year. Because next year they're renegotiating the financial budget for the entire European Union for the next budget round. My expectation, I might have heard this from a little bird, is that we will lose our rebate. So that 30% of what we used to pay, we will now have to pay the same as everybody else. Because if you look at the amount of money that the UK paid to the European Union per person, per capita, we're the third lowest contributors of all of the 28 countries. People say, yeah, but we're the biggest net contributor. No, we're not, because it's based on the number of the number of people in your country. It's like, of course we pay more than Slovakia, who've got a population of 6 million people. We've got 65 million people. That physical amount of money is going to be bigger. But when you break down the amount that we pay them, divided by the number of people in the UK, we're actually one of the third, with a third from the bottom. I think Netherlands is below us, and I can't remember the other one country, so I won't guess.
Me again. I just wanted to add to the response to the gentleman over here. I had a really good point about what do we do if we get the we manage the sorry? Oh, sorry, I was just talking to me. Anyway, two of the things we need to concentrate on: education on what actually happened, which caused the vote to go the way that it did. I'm actually working on several investigations, which Jason knows a lot of what I'm doing, about how much money's come from far-right sources, not just in Russia, but also in America. And if a lot of people knew how much money had actually gone in, and the tactics that the Vote Leave people had used, which are really, really, really nasty, and the way it's been coordinated and linked in with a guy called Steve Bannon, with Trump, etc. Some of you know this. But anyway, that's all going to come out sooner or later. At the moment, we don't have time to deal with that in a big way. But afterwards, education of children. Every other country in the EU, it's compulsory that you learn how the EU works, what the benefits are, how your internal politics systems works. What we've got here is a complete vacuum, which I believe Michael Gove actually started. He actually removed education about our political system from curriculum. So until we actually get that back into mainstream and make it cool for kids to actually learn how our politics works, how we can actually engage with our politicians, how we can make our politicians accountable as well, which is a really big thing, because at the moment, who knows which politicians are telling the truth? And another thing which I found really fascinating today, there was a poll done at the Labour Party conference, and they asked a lot of Labour supporters who, if they knew who members of the Labour Party were. 80% of them didn't know who Barry Gardiner was. 56% of them didn't know who John McDonnell was. So if they don't know who these people are that are talking to them, how do they know what their purpose is, and how do they actually know what they're actually voting for? Are they just sort of putting their finger up in the air?
Yes, I think they are.
Okay, so we'll maybe a couple more questions. After this gentleman, I'll be really interested to hear from anybody that's maybe leaning towards Brexit. If anyone here has a question that is a Brexiter, that would be really appreciated. But sorry.
Can I just give you a quick rider to what our friend here said with the interesting shirt? Yeah, it's not just education. You want to look at our press. I've travelled widely, as I've told Jason, motor industry engineer. Look at our mainstream press in this country and how it publishes this way it talks, and compare it to El País, Le Monde, Frankfurt Allgemeine. It's what a difference. This country is in the dark ages, really in the dark ages. And did you read recently that the Sun described the EU as dirty rats? That's the level that the of our offshore billionaire tax avoiding press barons have got to. Okay? And I won't even go, well, another thing I'm going to touch on if I'm given a moment. Another thing is these billionaires who are so keen to get us out of the EU have a good look at what their attitudes are and how little they're talking about tax exiles. Okay? Very interesting subject indeed. Thanks.
So we can take one more question if anybody would like. Any hands? Right at the back there. Yeah.
Just sort of thinking practically about the march on the 20th of October, I've asked if I can do something practical like deliver leaflets, and I'm sort of waiting to hear back if I can just have like a couple of thousand leaflets for me to go and deliver on my local area. If everybody here could maybe say did the same sort of thing and say could deliver 200-300 leaflets in their local community and street to encourage, you know, themselves, more their family and friends to actually attend the march in London, that would be a really good step in the right direction.
That's actually a really good place to end on. There is a massive march on October the 20th. There was a march earlier in the year for a second referendum for people's votes, and there was a significant amount of people there. The march on the 20th is already looking like it's going to be 25% bigger, judging by the initial numbers. So we are absolutely storming this. But as well as the 20th of March, if you happen to be in London with your dog, there's a march on Parliament Square called the Wooferendum. And you can find it at wooferendum.org, not my website. It's really sweet. So they're expecting thousands of dogs marching on Parliament to worry about veterinary vaccines, and you've got to give 4 months notice to get your dog out of the country, losing your pet passports and all the rubbish that goes along with it. So there's some real dog lovers that have got a bunch of people together. So have a look at the Wooferendum, but definitely be there for the People's March on the 20th of October. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to Stuart, Jason, and thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's beer time. Beer o'clock.